It's great to have the opportunity to be here with everyone today. Hopefully everybody can see the slides okay. So what my goal here today really is to talk about what we're seeing from an automation perspective around the world. What I thought would be useful is I'm going to give some real live examples of what we're seeing around the world. And as Ron mentioned, my focus here with UiPath is strictly in the public sector. So I look at what governments are doing, both on the state and local side and the federal side, and I look at education. And for us, education really isn't just one type of education. So we look at higher education, we look at K through 12, and we look at workforce development programs. And so again, that'll be part of the conversation that I have here. So what I thought I would do was just start by talking a little bit about automation in the sense of where we're trying to target. And hopefully for those of you that are focused on public sector customers around the world, the content you see on the slide here isn't new to you. The challenges within public sector are still the same challenges that we've seen for many years. And I've been focused within the public sector space and supporting public sector customers for over 25 years. And so we see a lot of the same types of issues and constraints that are happening. I think with the world and the current situation we are with the COVID crisis, we're seeing different priorities that are happening, and I'll talk a little bit about some of that. But we're very specifically looking at ways that technology can help solve the problems within public sector. That's specifically what we're trying to do. What I wanted to do, though, was paint just a little bit of a picture about automation. And I'm going to use a couple of terms just to make sure people are familiar with the concept of what's happening in the automation space. So first off, when I say the word robot, what I'm typically talking about is some software process that is running either on a PC or in a virtual environment. It could be on a server, but it's some software process that is being used to automate things. In our world, in the UiPath world, a robot can run multiple automations. Meaning, think of the robot as a digital worker. And that worker can do, for the most part, anything that a person could do in a digital environment. In fact, the robot typically will mimic human behavior. So for example, in many organizations, we see swivel chair activities, meaning that one system has some information that comes in. Maybe it's a student applying for application into a university, or maybe it's somebody applying for some sort of benefits to the state or city or county government. But they're using some application, and in many cases, behind the scenes, there is a different application that does the end processing. And a lot of times, a person has to actually take the data from one system and put it into another system. In more modern systems, there's either a web-based connection or an API that's working behind the scenes, but what we find is there's still a lot of manual work that has to happen. So our goal is to be able to take the manual, repetitive, mundane work, the types of tasks that are fatiguing for people or monotonous, or the term that we typically say is automate what you hate. So the types of things that you have to do day in and day out, or every Monday morning you run the TPS report or whatever it happens to be, let the robots do those types of things for you so that people can focus on the more cognitive types of things that humans are really good at doing. It's important to keep in mind that the robots can only do what you program them to do, meaning that they are decision tree based typically. So you can set up a set of rules, the robots follow the rules. And in early versions of automation, if the robot came to an exception in the rule and didn't know what to do, in essence, the process would break and the robot would throw an error. It would respond back saying, I don't know what to do. And it would just sit there in a wait state. Well, in today's world, we've made it so that people and robots can work seamlessly together, so that as the robots are doing processing, if they find an exception or a question that needs to be asked to a human, they can assign it to a human in a task window. They could send a text message. They could pop up a window via some sort of instant message or communication, whatever it happens to be. But they can interact back and forth. When the person is done with the part of their task that they're working on, by submission, they can then hand it back over to the robot. So robots and people working hand in hand together. The last thing I always want people to realize is our goal is to make sure that all of the applications can work seamlessly. And by no means is this me saying that you should use robots to integrate every single application that's out there. I'm a firm believer that if there are integration opportunities or process enhancements within your business environment, you should absolutely focus on those. But in the cases where you do need people to help or you have mass scale that needs to exist, automation is perfect to add into that. Now, the types of things that we see robots doing are really any type of application engagement. So again, this could be logging into a system, it could be looking for data, it could be opening an email, reading an email and looking for certain things like sentiment analysis. So we worked with a city recently where the city communications director was being inundated with email that were coming into their inbox. And what they wanted to do was just quickly decide what to do with those emails. And what they found was there were certain keywords or sentiment that's within the email. And based on the sentiment, if it was an issue, a concern, or a complaint to the city, they wanted to hand it to the communications director so that they could then decide how they would handle it. For other types of things, information that was being sent to the city, a thank you to somebody, what they wanted to do was handle those differently. And in many cases, they would use robots to send back an automated response, thanking the person for their input and their feedback and moving on to the next process. So robots can really do any of these types of things. Now, the other thing I wanted to point out is that the robots that we deliver from UiPath are relatively sophisticated. We use a lot of AI capabilities behind the scenes. So it's not just being able to connect to a system and understand what's happening in the system, but in many cases, it's actually being able to do things like read a screen. So the robots have the ability, using something we call computer vision, to look at fields on the screen and be able to determine and decipher what those fields are and then apply it within the business logic. And what we're finding is that because robots can do all of these different capabilities, anything that can be automated is being looked at from an automation perspective. And when you look across the back office or the front office, including all of the mission-oriented systems in an organization, you're finding automations that are appearing in many of these different scenarios. Now, the beauty of this is when I look across the public sector, the blue boxes on the screen that you see, these 8 categories, these are the highest priority that we're seeing customers go through an automation process. In fact, I joined UiPath just under 2.5 years ago, and invoice processing there on the bottom left, that was the #1 thing that we were seeing happening. Every organization has some sort of invoice processing that has to happen, and they just find it repetitive and manual. And it's a simple concept when you think about it. I open an invoice that comes in via some portal or some system or some email as an attachment, but I look at the invoice, I open my PO system, I match the two. If they match and the terms are correct, I go ahead and pay it. Well, you don't need people to be able to do those things. Perfect case for automation. Where you need a person is if there's an exception in there. What if the line item amount that we're being charged is different than the purchase order amount? I need to do some sort of analysis. And then actually in today's world, in some cases, the robots can actually handle some of the initial things, like they can send a response back almost immediately that says, hey, these things don't match, can you give us more information? I can have robots do those types of things. But there are times where somebody needs to get on the phone or reach out to somebody and have a conversation, and that's where people will always come into the loop. Now, my goal is not to read all of the different boxes that are on here, but you'll see that there are a variety of different areas, all the way from engagement with the customer, whether it's citizens, whether it's students, whether it's alumni, whatever it happens to be. There's some sort of engagement mechanisms that need to happen. Contact center support or call center support. We're seeing a lot of people going through automation processes, whether they're trying to get in touch with an actual person or even if there's a chatbot that's doing the work. And if the chatbot's only coded or programmed to deliver certain types of response, the chatbot can actually engage a robot to go and log into a system, collect the appropriate information, get a status, and respond. Of course, there's an identity verification process on the front end that is typically required. So again, we can engage with any of those. What the red circles are on the screen, so I have them listed as 1, 2, and 3. I wanted to call these out because these are the areas, since the COVID crisis has hit, these are the top 3 areas where we're seeing requests for support. In the bottom right where it says integrated eligibility, this is basically any type of benefit system. So these could be people that are applying for some sort of benefit due to the crises. In the state governments, these are things like additional requests for SNAP, TANF, WIC, so benefits for food sustenance programs, housing subsidies, transportation subsidies, those types of things. It could be unemployment insurance if somebody has lost their job and they're looking for support. But the different types of benefit systems, there's been a huge surge in the state governments for benefit access. In the university space, very similar. So you have a lot of students that are trying to either get information, they're trying to get, COVID testing before they're going home for the holidays, or whatever it is that happens to be happening, different types of benefits that need to be processed. I mentioned the contact center support, but I wanted to mention number 3 there as well, HR onboarding and offboarding. So there's been a big surge in the number of people that are added into the workforce to help support the surge on the crisis side, whether it's handling phone calls that are coming in or requests for information, whether it happens to be additional benefit processing requests that are coming. And I'll give you an example. We had one state government that was processing somewhere around 1,100 unemployment insurance requests a week, just during a typical week prior to the crises, and that surged to 130,000 per day. You can imagine there is no call center that will be big enough to be able to handle the surge in the number of people that need benefits. And what we found was over a 7-day period, we were able to work with them to deploy 350 robots. So 350 digital workers that can work tirelessly 24 hours a day. They don't make any errors. They do have the ability to interact with people. And what they found was that over the course of a 7-day period, they were able to process over $10 billion in unemployment insurance requests. And I think the state realized even if they were able to find enough people to man the call center, it still would have taken months. I think their estimate was somewhere around 3 months. So lots of opportunities for automation. We're seeing lots of success in that space. What I wanted to do was just make mention of the UiPath platform. So the way our platform is set up, it's not just about automating a process. Our platform is a full end-to-end automation methodology. Our goal is to help you start from the beginning of understanding what you do in your organization that would make sense to automate, and then go through the process of building the automations, working into the automation process where a person would be involved. And just to give you an idea, the way you build an automation, we have a tool that's called Studio. That tool looks very similar to anyone that's seen something like Microsoft Visio. It's a drag and drop environment, including AI capabilities. So we do make AI drag and droppable, however people want to run their automations. Being able to run the automations themselves, obviously, and manage that process. So how many robots will work, what the schedule will be for the robots if you want to schedule. And believe it or not, we actually can set the robots up to work like people. We do have some state governments that have unions around labor that only allow robots to work the same time periods that people are working. And keep in mind, our goal is not to have robots replace people, it's to make people's jobs better. So it's to take the arduous work or the repetitive types of mechanical functions that happen in a business and automate those so people can focus on the stuff people are good at doing. Now, throughout this entire process, we believe it's important to measure your results or whatever it is you're trying to automate. So we do have a measurement and governance model that's built into the process, and it's a full-blown analytics suite, although we'll fully integrate with any of the existing analytic engines that organizations are using as well. But we believe it's important to be able to measure as you go through that process. Now, one of the things I wanted to point out about the robots is the way UiPath looks at robots, there are 2 different types of robots typically. One is robots that just work independently. These are robots that are always on point, and these are typically 24-hour based robots, and they're constantly watching for something. They're looking for a new record in a database. They're looking for a transaction to have occurred. They're looking for an email to have been sent to an inbox. They're looking for an attachment on an email. We call those unattended robots. And organizations typically benefit by having a server that are running or servers that are running these robots that are constantly looking for information and integrating different types of systems. The other type of robots are what we call attended robots. And these are robots that typically work alongside of a person. So think of a contact center person. They want to do identity verification when somebody is dialing in. They can click a button, so it's usually a little icon on the screen. They click the icon, and as people are talking, the robot is doing something. Maybe it's listening to what the person says and translating that and then using that to do identity verification. Maybe it's information the person has typed onto the screen into a chat window, or the call center agent is even typed into a window. The robot can take that and log into a system. There are a variety of different ways that they can work together. But attended robots typically work side by side with people. What we find is that a combination of those are typically the most valuable within an organization. And I'm going to give you some examples here in just a minute of where we've seen some successes with institutions, with government agencies, and even in the commercial space. UiPath, as I mentioned, has been delivering automation capabilities for a number of years. When I first started, as I said, about 2.5 years ago, what I found was many organizations were looking at back office types of capabilities. So I mentioned invoice processing, maybe HR onboarding and offboarding. And now I would say there's a pretty even distribution when you look across the public sector as to what people are doing. To give you some examples, so one of our early customers is actually still one of our great customers and expanding dramatically within their organization. It's the University of Auckland in New Zealand. And now we have many universities around the world and in the United States that are using UiPath capabilities, but I like calling out the University of Auckland story because initially, the initial process that they were looking to automate started around the request for transcripts. And if you think about a university, the number of students that have graduated and organizations that either need a copy of a transcript or requests from students or former students for transcripts, it's just a mechanical process. You validate that it's a legitimate request, you retrieve the transcript, you send it to somebody. Maybe it's mailed via the postal service, maybe it's emailed, maybe it's a digital image that's sent via some other messaging platform. But very simple concept, but it just took a lot of time. So the University of Auckland sat down, they started looking at transcript requests, and they started looking at some other types of system processes that were happening. I mentioned things like invoice processing or the onboarding and offboarding of students. Think about all of the different steps that have to occur when a student is new to the campus. And I'll urge you, don't get caught up on just the university aspects. This exact same concept is being applied to within state and local governments, federal governments, and commercial entities that have these exact same processes. Automation is perfect for these types of things. And if you look at the results in the bottom right, you see things like 23,000 hours annually are saved from manual work processes. The way we look at it, these are 23,000 hours of time that people have back into their lives to do things that people are good at being able to do. We're really proud of the work that Auckland has been able to do. In fact, one of the additional things that had come when they first rolled out their processes in 2019 was that UiPath had developed an open source curriculum, well, I shouldn't say open source. It's a curriculum that we had developed that we then give to the universities that they can extend into. So again, there's I think the open source component on their side, but we give a full-blown automation curriculum to universities. We call it the Academic Alliance. There's no charge to the universities from our perspective because we believe that automation will be a core concept that the next generation workforce are going to need to have. And so we wanted to make sure that we've enabled that. We're really proud of the Academic Alliance and the rollout that's occurred. And as I mentioned, it's happening all around the world with hundreds of universities today. Now, I didn't want to talk just about education. I want to give you a couple of other examples, and I'm just painting the vision across the public sector. So another scenario that I find really interesting is what the state of Ohio within the Department of Health had been struggling with, which was ultimately they wanted to make sure the quality of care for people that were receiving benefits by the state were as high as possible. People need to have good quality health care. They also wanted to make sure that the cost of care was as low as possible, meaning that it was efficient and maximized. And one of the scenarios that they were running into was that they were having pregnant mothers coming into the hospital to have newborn babies. And in many cases, the mother had not been able to see doctors just due to some of the scenarios they were. These were typically mothers who were receiving some sort of Medicaid support. And what they found was that the mother would come into the hospital, they would give birth to a baby, and there were times, many times, where I think the children were being discharged from the hospital with the mother within the 48-hour time period or whatever was happening. But some of the documentation about the child being placed into the Medicaid system hadn't happened quick enough. And the issue that they were running into was there was a lot of paperwork behind the scenes of adding newborn children into the birth registry system and then duplicating that information into the Medicaid system and possibly other systems. And so the state of Ohio decided that they would implement automations to be able to set up robots so that they would type the information into a system once, the robots would capture that information and then go apply it into all of the other systems that were there. They called it the baby bot, and what they found was that the initial goal was that they were having less newborns coming back into the emergency room for health-related issues because they were able to set up appointments for the children and the mother before they left the hospital. Well, by using the baby bot to do the scheduling and management of this process, they found ultimately that the quality of care was higher than it was in the past. Having less mothers come in with ill newborns, especially into the emergency room, resulted in a lower cost of care. So definitely hitting the targets in the way they wanted to work. The beauty of this story is there are a few other processes that they've been able to implement as well. So now they have an entire set of health services bots that are being delivered within the state of Ohio. The last one I wanted to mention, so this one is on the U.S. federal side, and this is actually an organization called the Air Force Personnel Center. This is the organization within the United States Air Force that manages when a person moves from one location to another. It could be somebody who's new into the military. It could be somebody who is moving from location to location, or somebody who's being discharged. And what they found was that they had people who sat at a desk all day, every day, and they entered information into a system. And they found that because they were doing this mundane task, the error rates were relatively high, so they had to do a lot of audits. Well, the beauty of this story was there were a couple of young airmen within the United States Air Force that had heard about automation, and they went out and researched the concept of automation themselves. They went to the UiPath website, saw that we offer all of our training online at no cost. So they took the training, downloaded the community version of our product, and started building automations to see if this could solve the problem. Once they had built it, they realized there was a huge potential. They brought it to their management. The management looked at this and said, absolutely, this is fantastic. Let's license this and implement. And they did that. And since they've done that, they've now been able to grow that concept with innovation using the talented staff that they have within the United States Air Force now, to the point where they recently began deployment of 50,000 people within the United States Air Force, all having access to automation. That concept we call a robot for every person enables everyone to have the ability to build automations and share them across their organization. So we expect the number of hours that they're saving from the manual processes to go up dramatically, and the amount of time they can spend focused on the human innovation stuff to increase dramatically. So with that said, those were just 3 examples of what we're seeing in the public sector space. I put my email address up on the page, and I would highly encourage you, if you have follow-up questions, reach out to me.